Good morning, Illini. I'm Matt Schrock, your host here for Healthy Illini, and we have a big topic today, one that has a lot to cover, so I'm going to keep this intro short. Hope you're doing well. Glad you're with us. Glad you're listening, and I'm really excited to have you with us today, so let's just jump right into it. Today, we're talking about epilepsy, and before we get into what that is or any of the details, I do want to introduce our guests today. I have three guests with me. First up is Erica Fleck. She is the Vice President of Government Affairs, Public Relations, and Advocacy with the Epilepsy Advocacy Network, which she founded, which is a member of the Epilepsy Alliance America. Erica, thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me.
We're also joined by Kristen Neville. She is the Champaign Client Coordinator for Epilepsy Advocacy Network. Kristen, thanks for being here.
Thank you.
And we're also joined by a student here from UIUC. Rachel Geckler is a junior in the iHealth and Pre-Med track. Rachel, I really appreciate you joining us.
Thank you.
Okay, so I'm really thankful, excuse me, I'm really thankful to have all three of you on this episode, as you have all had the diagnosis of epilepsy. Your firsthand experience is really important to this discussion because I honestly don't know a whole lot. And so I want to have your perspective on that. But I want to start with some groundwork, because for me, and I think I represent a number of people, that my only understanding of epilepsy is it has to do with seizures. And it has to do with flashing lights. And the only reason I know about flashing lights is because of the warnings before movies or music rise or video games I've seen my whole life that just say epilepsy warning, there are lights that could trigger, and that's all I know. And so let's start there, because I want to have a baseline, have some groundwork, because that understanding that I have, I know is very narrow and very incomplete. And so I want to know more, and I want our listeners to have the opportunity to understand better. So let's just start with, can you help me understand what is epilepsy? Let's just start right there.
Well, epilepsy is a seizure disorder, and how you get diagnosed with that is that if you've had 2 unprovoked seizures within a short period of time. Usually if you have 2 or 3 within that 6 months, then you will be diagnosed with epilepsy. However, they also do other tests to make sure that that is what is causing your seizures, because it could be a tumor, it could be like a lesion in your brain that had caused that. For you to have a seizure, they do an EEG where they put electrodes on your skull to see what your brain activity is. If they see spikes, then they know that you're probably diagnosed with epilepsy. Now, there's different types of seizures.
Okay.
And there's different types. So there could be generalized seizures, which are the tonic-clonic, which they changed the term. It used to be called grand mal. Tonic-clonic sounds like a drink now, but a lot of times when people think seizures, they think grand mal seizures, but not everybody has those. Some people have focal seizures, which they're simple, partial complex seizures, where sometimes the person would wander around, lip smack, maybe a blank stare for a few minutes, and then come back. And some people can have both. It just depends.
I think that's a really important distinction, because when I think seizure, in my inaccuracy, I think shaking, and that's, you fall, on the floor, shaking, can't talk, can't move kind of thing. But it's so much more complex than that. And it oftentimes, well, I should say often, but apparently there are times that that's not even a part at all, correct?
Correct.
Right.
Okay. So there are a lot of different types of seizures, you said, and obviously we're not going to get into the depths of it. If you have questions about that, I really strongly, if you're listening, talk to a medical professional, find out what qualifies a seizure or what you're experiencing. Does that qualify? We'll talk a little bit more about those questions for providers and things like that later. But let's do a quick pivot to what can trigger. What are the triggers for seizures and things to look out for that can cause that moment?
One major trigger for a lot of people is anxiety and stress and lack of sleep. Those are major things.
Something that a college campus knows nothing about, apparently.
No, nothing.
No students are ever stressed or lacking sleep.
Poor appetite. And when you had said the flashing lights, that could cause some people to have a seizure.
Mm-hmm.
Not everybody. Epilepsy does it, the flashing lights.
See, that's the thing. That's why this was something that I really wanted to talk about when you started giving me your prep work and I started looking into it, is because that's all I knew. I mean, literally, that's what I knew was flashing lights. I knew there probably would be more, but I thought that was like the main one, the key. But from what you're saying right now, It's not.
Not that wasn't for me, but I get what you're saying. I went to a Maroon 5 concert in the beginning.
Yes.
They put a sign that says if you have, this could cause you to have a seizure because they used a bunch of strobe lights. And of course, my husband looked and he's like, you dragged me to a Maroon 5 concert. Now you might have a seizure. And I'm like, no, I don't have that type, and I'm like, I'll be all right.
And really, I mean, honestly, if we're honest about that, that is less for awareness than it is for legal protection.
Right.
Right.
It's like the McDonald's coffee cup that says contest may be hot, and you're going, well, of course it is, but that's just covering in case somebody tries to sue. Same kind of idea. Flashing lights do cause a seizure, then they have legal coverage as opposed to some sort of awareness or advocacy or anything like that.
And something like that happened to me at my previous job. There was one of the lights was flickering. I worked at a store, and one of the lights was flickering in the back. And I told my manager, I'm like, hey, can you fix that? Because not only me, but other people that just have migraines or whatever, that could trigger something, you need to fix that light. And after a while, I had to go home because I was getting dizzy. I mean, it could affect anybody like that. I was just getting dizzy, and I was like, I'm not even driving home. I had my husband pick me up because that's something that I would like to reach out to in the area. We train at schools and places like that, but I'd like to reach out to workplaces as well, because you never know when something can happen to one of your workers or anything. And so it's just good to be aware of what things can trigger a seizure as well.
I do want to go deeper into that in just a moment, but before we get there, one more question about just kind of the baseline of what we're talking about with epilepsy is there a particular age? Is there an age that tends to affect? No. Okay. And it's something that can be developed as you age. Is that correct?
Yeah.
I mean, like some kids have it, but then some people don't get it until they're older. I mean, am I correct in that?
Right. And it could kind of pause in your life. One of my clients said that her son had seizures as a baby, and then he's been fine for the last few years, and then all of a sudden he's 7 years old and it's coming back again. So it can happen at any point. And Rachel, could tell her story on that as well.
Yeah, I was 16 whenever I had my first one, and I was diagnosed after my first one. So I didn't have like the typical 2 seizures before I was, because it was so big. And then I got my normal EEG, whatnot. And then they were like, you've been having them randomly, sporadically while you're just sitting in class your entire life. So that was that was a big shock for me. So, but my sister was younger, and I think she was a baby when she was diagnosed. So it's completely different for every person.
Okay, so we've established a baseline of I don't know anything, of a lot of misconceptions, which makes it really tough, because now it's like, okay, I'm unlearning everything I thought I'd learned, and now I need to start fresh, which is okay. Actually, it's a good place to be, because now I'm asking questions and I want to know more. So we kind of talked about the very, very, very basic baseline of what epilepsy is, of what a seizure can be, of what a trigger can be. So let's say somebody is listening and they're trying to figure out, if it's such a wide variety of ages, if it's such a wide variety of symptoms of implications, what do I look for? How do I start with what's something? I know you said, seizures within a certain period of time, but if all I think of seizures is falling down and shaking, what am I looking for to say, okay, this is something I need to go talk to a medical professional about?
If a person who thinks that they're having seizures, the one thing would probably go see a neurologist.
Okay.
So they would diagnose you correctly. Then they have specialists that are epileptologists. They are neurologists, but they specialize in epilepsy only. They're at the level 4 epilepsy centers, such as in Springfield, Chicago, Peoria, Rockford.
And here in Champaign as well, we have really good epileptologists at Carl Hospital.
And then, so they would do a variety of tests. Now, sometimes people will say, well, they didn't find anything on the EEG. Well, that doesn't mean that they don't have seizures, that the seizure might just be embedded deep inside of the brain, that they just can't pick it up. So what would happen would be that they would do a video EEG where they would keep you overnight and see what you would do. And then they would do some flashing lights to trigger you to have a seizure.
Sure.
So then they could see where the seizure, they could try to pinpoint where the seizure is coming from. And it all also depends, like if the type of seizure you have, they would know where exactly it's coming from. So if you had the tonic-clonic seizure, they know that the seizure is happening on both sides of the brain. If you had a simple partial seizure or a focal seizure, it's coming either from one part of the brain on the right or the left.
So if you are curious, and because it can be so particular to who you are there certain things when you go talk to a professional, a medical professional, is there certain questions you need to ask, or certain things you need to be able to document and say, this is what I've experienced here, here, and here? Are there keys to getting the treatment that you need?
Right. Yes. So when I went and saw the doctor, I told him exactly what I was doing, that I would feel. So there are these things called the auras, and that is the beginning of a seizure. Not everybody gets an aura. I would get an aura, which was called a deja vu, which everybody gets deja vu feelings, like a Groundhog's Day. But I would get this overwhelming feeling like I've done this before. And at first diagnosis, it was a panic attack. They were like, you're having a panic attack. And I'm like, I'm not really panicking about anything, And I'm like, I don't feel like I should be panicking about anything. And then when I went to talk to a doctor that I said, I get this deja vu feeling, he knew right away I was having seizures, that was my aura. Some people get a weird taste in their mouth, a weird smell. Maybe they have, their stomach hurts, tingling feeling before, and that's the beginning of the seizure.
Kristen and Rachel, what about you? I do want to get your personal stories in this. So for you, what were the initial signs that, hey, this might be going on with me?
I wasn't officially diagnosed with epilepsy till I was 22 years old. But I had my first grand mal seizures, as we used to call them. My first one was when I was 14 years old, and I hadn't had another seizure like that until I was in college. But I've had multiple auras, and all these different types of seizures that are unseen most of my life, probably starting at around age 10. And we just couldn't figure out what the problem was. My parents had taken me to different doctors, and they just said, oh, she might have ADHD, or somebody, as a person that I saw when I was in college, she's like, oh, it's just an anxiety disorder. And so I just felt really alone my whole life, basically, with this, because I'm like, what is this? I know this is different. Like, a lot of people that I speak to that have no idea what I'm going through, they don't have those weird auras. They don't have these weird feelings. They don't, I just felt like, okay, this is how I am. I don't know what it is. And it was such a relief to finally, after college, I came back home and saw some neurologists here in Champaign, and finally to be diagnosed with what it is, I was like, I just felt a relief. I'm like, I am not alone anymore. I'm not the only one, because I just felt like alienated from the rest of the world. Like, even my family at times, I mean, they tried their best to figure out what was going on with me, but they didn't know.
Sure.
And it's a very invisible thing. Like we said, not everybody's going to shake and do all that, which I had done a couple of times, but most every day is just, my everyday life was just like, oh, I'm out of it for a few seconds. I'm good now. And be really tired. And I didn't know what that was.
In epilepsy, everybody's epilepsy is different, and it's like a spectrum disorder. What her epilepsy is compared to mine is totally different, or to yours, Rachel. Everybody's. You might get a few people that are the same. You're like, I do the same thing.
Yep.
So, and like how she had said, there is 1 out of 26 people have epilepsy. That's the statistic. And then 1 out of 10, anybody could have a seizure. Anybody could have a seizure from high fevers, alcohol or drug withdrawal, if they're really sick, something like that.
Rachel, I do want you to share a little bit about your initial journey, and kind of what, I know you said you had a rather large seizure.
Yeah.
And so that's what started it. But what were there any signs going into it, or was yours just kind of all of a sudden it showed up?
It was pretty much all of a sudden my story, per se. I was at like a summer camp. We were all just like playing a game together, whatnot. We were actually like on top of this like fountain. We were like running through it because it was summer. It was hot. And I like felt weird for some reason. So I like jumped off of the fountain. And then the second I landed, I just felt, I don't remember anything else. I remember waking up in the ambulance. I had two conversations on the phone while I wasn't aware of what was going on. But I got diagnosed before that day, and I was diagnosed. It was probably 2 weeks. So everything was extremely, extremely, extremely quick. I that was a big deal for me because I mean, I was 16. No one else around me had it. So I was extremely alone. At the time, I kind of thought that for some weird reason that my brain was different, like that I wasn't quote unquote smart anymore. I couldn't read or anything. Like I was really anxious all the time that everything that I was doing was wrong. So it was kind of a big identity crisis for me. And I think it took a good 6 months for me after I got diagnosed to really just be like, what I'm going through is okay. And the weird reason for me is because people in my school started to have them, which is really weird. I had this girl in my class that she started having them from stress. She was going through them during school. So for me, it was like everyone was like freaking out. It's like, no, it's okay. She's just, it's not super abnormal because people go through it. It's just not as vocal. You don't see it as much, but people do go through it. So that definitely for me was a weird transition, but it helped me overall.
What I was going to say that there is if you have a seizure, like say you have your very first one, like you had said, I think you said you had one at 13 or
yes,
and then you didn't have anything for a while. There's the 60% chance in that 10 years you'll have another unprovoked seizure, because that was unprovoked. No one knows why she had that. And same at 21, I had my first seizure, but nobody knew. They took me by ambulance, and you get mixed diagnosed a lot.
Yeah.
A lot. And I woke up at the hospital. I had no idea what had happened. Woke up in front of my dad, and I was out of it, because completely out of it. And I remember asking him, like, am I dying? Am I dying? Well, that hospital took that as I wanted to harm myself.
Right.
And then they put me on the 3rd floor.
Yeah.
And I remember calling my mom, and I was cussing, like, get me the heck out of here. And she's like, Erica, that is why you're in there. I'm like, because I cussed, that's why I'm in here. Get out of here.
Right.
And then they diagnosed me with having panic attacks.
Yeah.
Nothing ever happened again. Then 10 years later, I was driving on Interstate 80. I had a seizure, and I totaled my car. Thank God I leased it. And so they took me to the hospital. They had no idea that I keep doing this. I keep getting like little car accidents. And the ER doctor said, well, you probably should go see a cardiologist and a neurologist. So I went and saw a cardiologist to make sure everything was okay with my heart. I have one. So my mom was wrong, but my heart was fine. Then I go to a neurologist, and then they diagnosed me with epilepsy. And of course, I knew nobody who had that, nobody in the area. And, I'm in a rural area where I'm like, where do you go for help? And the doctors can only tell you so much, they only have so much time. And it was a struggle. It was a real struggle, trying to find everything out. And then years later, I struggled for 5 years, not being able to drive. I had gotten pregnant at the same time, with the diagnosis. I'm like, oh, great, now what? And everything was fine. And then, lo and behold, I go to a beauty shop of all places, and the beautician says, you should go to this doctor in Chicago. So I went, and I'm like, there's specialists out there for this? Oh, my goodness. So I went, they did all these tests, and then he pops open the door and says, you're a dream candidate for brain surgery. Dream. Well, of course, I dragged my feet on this because,
Sure.
I'm like, it's not like I was getting my knees scoped or something. And I was like, so I dragged, my feet for a while, but it was getting worse. So I went through the brain surgery, and then 10 years later, seizure free.
So let's very, very briefly, because I do want to touch on this real quick, but what are treatment options? Is there singular, are there multiple?
There's quite a bit. There's the medication versus what they're going to diagnose, put you on. And you're going to be like a little bit of a guinea pig. So they will give you some medication, and then it might work for a while. Then you have a breakthrough seizure. Then they'll up the dosage. Then they might add on another medication. And this is within probably a good 2-year span, that they'll do this. And then when they've tried 2 or 3 seizure medications, chances are none of them are going to work. Then that's when they diagnose you with intractable epilepsy. And that's when they think they could try. There's the VNS. That's a vagus nerve stimulator. There is the RNS. that's another stimulator that they put in, responsive neurostimulator for the brain. And then there's brain surgery.
Right.
And then there's the DBS, which is the deep brain stimulator. That used to be used for Parkinson's. And then it was FDA approved probably about 5 or 6 years ago for epilepsy.
So, I mean, clearly it's a spectrum. There's a good way to put it. There's a whole host of indicators that could be. There's a whole host of triggers that could be. There's a whole host of treatment that could be. So that's a very difficult path to navigate for anybody.
Yes.
So, Rachel, you talked about some of the stigma with it. What, from your personal perspective, because there's that whole host of things, it's a really tough journey to go through, and add on to that there's some stigma around epilepsy. So Rachel, you'd put that in your prep work. Would you share, like, what kind of stigmas are there? What did you experience?
For me personally, the stigmas were particularly towards my academic work, because at the time, I mean, I'm still a full-time student, but at the time I was in high school, so I was really focused on my work. I was going towards like being high in my class, whatnot, and everything. So after I had that seizure, it was right before my junior year. So I was extremely scared that like I wasn't going to do good on my ACT, my SAT, all those classes that I was in. I was scared that I was going to do awful in, because at the time, school is everything for me. So particularly with the school setting, that was what I was stigmatizing myself with, because I wasn't really focused on the outside stigma so much. But that was particularly for me what I was focusing on.
Well, and then schoolwork is any high school. I've got a high school senior. That's a stress for every high school student. You know, how am I going to do a test? How am I doing the ACT? How am I doing and then you add in the extra layer of uncertainty about what you're dealing with, and the unpredictableness of what you're dealing with can be really tough. So, were you able to find community? Were you able to find people to support you, or did you pretty much navigate that on your own?
I would say I found people because there's some people in my family who have it. Like my oldest sister has it. She's had it her entire life. My cousin, who I'm particularly close to, she started having them while she was like 8 or 9. So she's been going through them for a while. And then, as I said previously, another girl in my school started having them. So seeing people who have gone through it and who are going through different paths but still have the same diagnosis, it's nice to talk to them and see how they're doing and what they're going through and what tests they're going through, medication they're taking, and everything like that. That's nice to find people who understand what you're going through.
It's like you gravitate to them.
Yeah,
And as you find
you're like,
out,
oh, okay.
you know, and you, like, as soon as you find out, you want to know their, what struggles, because you're going through them.
It is very helpful. I do a support group here in Champaign and for epilepsy, and one of my clients was speaking about that, and he just was saying how his anxiety has gone up and down super fast, like a roller coaster. And I was like, I totally understand that, because he's like, I've talked to my family about this and they don't get it. Like, your moods can change super quickly. Like you said, everybody's epilepsy is different and how you change and react to things. But when he was describing that, I'm like, yep. I mean, I've been there. I mean, it's so nice to know that somebody else gets what you're going through.
It's all the crazy tests, because the EEGs are no joke.
Yes. And here at Carl, before I had the brain surgery as well, one of the multiple tests that they did was called a WADA test. And so they have lots of different things that they can do to test what part of your brain is triggering most of the seizures. And it's just amazing how much they can do now. Because when I was your age, like they didn't have as many tests then. And so it took them way longer to diagnose me. And I'm so happy for you and for one of my other clients, that they were able to figure it out like 6 months into it. It's like, this is what it is. And I'm so happy that, doctors are able to figure that out so much quicker now.
I'm sitting and listening, and Rachel, you're listening off, your cousin and you, other people that you know. And my first thought, because in accuracy and just knee-jerk, is like, wow, is it more common now than it ever has been? I don't think so. I think it's just more awareness has made better diagnosis, because as I'm sitting here, I'm listening to you and you're saying, anxiety. Well, I deal with anxiety. Talking about you wake up, you don't know where you are. Well, I've had concussions with memory loss. It can be other things. And so I think I think it's safe to say that over our past history, there have been times where it just wasn't understood well enough, and so it was called something else. And that's not really, I'm not a knock on anybody or any negative on anybody. It's just that's what it was. It's kind of like my youngest is on the autism spectrum. I think I've talked about this on the program before. And there's a spectrum there as well. But there are certain things that he deals with that could have been diagnosed other ways.
Right.
But we know it's part of his spectrum disorder. So it's kind of the same idea that there's more awareness. And I mean, Kristen even talked about it at a job. You're like, this could trigger, this could, you're speaking on it, which raises awareness, which raises understanding. And that's an important piece. So I digress. I went outside there.
No, but it's more common than you think. And like, I think too, back then there was a stigma. It was a form. People thought it was a form of mental illness. Yeah, exactly. People had thought back in the day that you were a witch. And they would stone you, possessed. Yeah, and even when I got diagnosed, there was a time. My mom was like, "Are you faking these?" I'm like, "You would think I was faking these?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I don't want to drive for 5 years." I want you to keep giving me a ride to the store.
Right.
Yeah, and I'd be tired all the time.
Yeah. And the medication is probably the worst. It's not the worst, but there's the side effects.
Yeah,
medicine does help,
Yeah.
but there's side effects to everything.
Right.
Unfortunately, no, go ahead.
Are you guys on medication after?
I was on it for a year or two. I was on 6 medications before I had the surgery. And that's not right. Like you said, it should just be 2 or 3. But yeah, I was on 6 different medications, and after the surgery, I gradually weaned off, and now I have been off of medication for a couple of years.
I'm not. I just don't want to do it anymore. I was on 3 or 4 different medications too. Walking around like a drunken sailor.
Yeah.
I think the doctor's like, "No wonder why you're walking around like a drunken sailor." I'm like, "I thought I just walked like that." Yeah. But as I had after the surgery, they weaned me off a couple other medications, and then they left me on one. And then he's like, "You can go off," and I'm like, "Yeah, could, but let's just Sure. I'll go with it. And I don't know if there's a lot of side effects. There might be irritability, but I'm always irritable.
Yeah.
And I really appreciate that you said, you could, but you decided not to, because again, if you've listened to this program at all, one of the things that we really push is that everyone is on their own personal journey, and there are commonalities, but everyone is unique.
Right.
And so I have 3 guests here who have experiences that are very similar in some ways, that are very unique in other ways. And you're making individual choices for where you are in your journey, and that's okay. And that's the important thing for anybody listening, is that, if you identify with part of it, great. If you don't identify with other part of it, that's okay too. It's finding your path and finding support through commonalities, but understanding that you are on your own path. It does not have to look like anyone else's. It might, but it does not have to. The last major thing I want to get to, because we have 4 people in this room, 3 of you have diagnosis of epilepsy. I do not. However, as someone who does not have a diagnosis, what can I do if I see someone having a seizure, or are there things I should look for? Because again, my understanding previous to this conversation is shaking on the floor, and for my first thought is roll them on the side, get their tongue out of their mouth. I mean, that's all I know.
Don't stick your hand.
Yeah, you cannot swallow your tongue.
But that is that's if I in the moment of panic, if I revert to what I quote unquote know, that's what I know, which is obviously wrong. And I do know not to put your hand in the mouth, because that's a bad idea all the way around. I know that now. But there's a time where that's what it was. Right. So my question is, as someone who does not have that diagnosis, if I am around someone who does, or they're going through that moment, what do I do?
Stay calm and track time. If they are having a tonic-clonic seizure, you would try to, lay them down gently. If they are, drooling, put them onto their left side if you can. Again, don't restrain them. Don't hold them down. Do not put anything in their mouth. They're not going to swallow their tongue. And after the seizure is done, stay with them, reassure them that it's okay, but don't expect that person to acknowledge what you're saying. Because that's called the postical part of it, where they'll be confused, very tired and exhausted. And that might take a little while for them to come back to their baseline. And but I guess if it was their first time seizure, or if this is the first time you've ever seen them have a seizure, I would call 911.
Yeah.
And different things you can look for different kinds of seizures is sometimes people, like Erica said earlier, sometimes people smack their lips, or some people play with their shirt, or just play with something. I know I've like played with stuff, or there was one time where I was sitting in church and just started mumbling something to myself, and I didn't even know. Those are things you can look for as well. There's with the different types of seizures.
I would say for me, it was a lot of spacing out.
Yes.
It was because mine are triggered by lack of sleep. So a lot of the time I like space out and I think that I'm like asleep and then I just come back. Back. It's like they were super quick. Like thinking about it from like a future stance per se, like looking back at the times that they were happening, I could definitely be like, yeah, I probably should have seen a doctor, but I didn't really realize that was what was happening at the time.
Right.
And we've said that there's a lot of different topics we've talked about, but one of the keys is just communication. If you're listening and you're friends with someone or a family member who does have an epilepsy diagnosis, just ask, what are you comfortable talking about? What do you want me to know? What are particulars that are important? How do I care for this? What's aftercare look like? What does precautions look like for you? Just having that conversation, because it is so individual. I can sit here and I can have a conversation with all three of you, and you're all three going to have different answers to that particular question.
Yeah. And one thing I think that is really important is, like Erica said, just speak calmly to the person, because they're coming out of their unawareness, and when you're freaking out, they're going to be freaking out too. I mean, there's one time when I had my first major seizure in front of my husband. I told him in advance, I'm like, I have epilepsy, don't call the ambulance, don't do this, but he was freaking out. And so I woke up from my seizure and I was getting into the ambulance and I was freaking out because my husband was freaking out and everybody, I'm like, what's going on? And like, you're not even aware what's going on anyway. So like, just if you're with somebody that's having a seizure, try your best to stay calm.
I appreciate you said try your best.
Try your best.
Because
it's hard to.
Because, stay calm in the moment, and especially if somebody you care about.
Yeah.
Like I said, my son's on the spectrum. We've had some issues, and in those moments, it's scary. He's now 9, but there were times when he was 6 or 7 and things were happening, and it's like you feel helpless. You don't know what to do. You want to help. And so, but you do your best to try and remain calm and try and be that support as best you can.
Rachel, you had said something that you wish you would have known better before I think that all the time. I wish I was a better advocate for myself, to ask all these questions to the doctor, to also, it's okay to go get a second or third opinion. If you have that first opinion and you're like, all right, then you're still struggling and they keep just maybe putting more medicine with you, giving you more medicine, go to a second doctor, go to a third doctor.
Definitely.
And I would always say to myself, I should have asked more questions. I should have been a bigger advocate for myself. And that's probably why I've gotten into doing what I do.
That leads perfectly into the last thing I want to say. In that is if somebody's listening and they're like, okay, I want to advocate for myself. I don't know what to ask. I don't know how to do it. Or I'm looking for community. What resources are there? Obviously, you're involved in various things that you can suggest. But, and we'll put these resources that you list, we'll put contact information in the bio as we always do with every episode. But would you share a little bit about what resources are available, especially here in the Champaign-Urbana area?
Well, we have support groups. Kristen, what days?
Yes, I do my support group the first Tuesday of every month at 5 o'clock at the Champaign Public Library.
We do one.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
And we do one. I think you're going to say we do a Zoom support group every month as well. Which ours is tonight. If anybody wants to join, and that's one way we reach out. And we try to reach out. I try to reach out here locally with going to, health fairs and human service council that I'm involved in, just reaching out to all these different people that need to hear it,
And support groups aren't for everybody. I know I was one of them that I was like, we do individual, people call in all the time and say, well, I don't really want to go to the support group, but that's fine. You call me and tell me what's going on and I'll see what I can do for you.
Right.
To get you the resources that you need. And I always say, I'm like Red from like Shawshank. I'm like, you tell me what you need and I'll get it for you. I'll get it for you. And that's usually a lot of times they're like, I need to find a doctor.
Right.
Could you get me to a doctor? And I'm like, yeah. And sometimes I'll meet them at their doctor appointments because they don't always know what the questions to ask. And or sometimes they'll forget. And I always tell them, like, make a list of questions before you go. and make sure you ask that, So that's what we do.
So if somebody wants to connect with you, do you have a website? Do you have social media? What are those?
We are on Facebook and Instagram.
Yes.
And our website is www.epilepsyadvocacynetwork.org. And there's a slew of information on there, a bunch of resources. We also do trainings for schools, personnel, staff, even for parents or caregivers. We do one every fourth Tuesday of the month via Zoom for free. And we can come out and do school trainings. We can come out and do it in person as well.
Rachel, are there any resources here on campus, like in the student body that you know of or you're involved in?
Not that I'm aware of personally. That is something that I definitely am interested about learning about, but as nothing as in depth as the network is, though.
Well, I really appreciate you all taking the time to speak with me today. It's been a learning experience for me, which I really appreciate. I love learning things anyway. But in the prep work, I was very, very clearly confronted with my lack of knowledge and my inaccuracy in what I thought was knowledge. And so I really appreciate you coming on and sharing some of your personal journey. Thank you so much.
Matt, just one more thing I'd like to say. If you have epilepsy, just remember, epilepsy doesn't have you.
That's a fantastic thought. Thank you again for being here.
Thank you.
There are a lot of health topics that we touch on, and some are very well known and some are not as well known. And epilepsy is one of those that falls in the latter category. And there's a lot of complexity to it. There's a lot of depth to it. And it's something that, as you heard, is more prevalent than I ever thought. And so if you have questions, if you're uncertain how to get the answers, reach out to the Epilepsy Advocacy Network. You can always reach out to us here at Healthy Illini. We'll be happy to put you in touch with people. Talk to us at McKinley if you want a provider opinion, things of those nature. Please reach out. You are not alone. You're not alone on this journey wherever you are in that. And so we are here to help out with that. We want to get you connected with people. We want to help you feel comfortable who you are and where you are. But thank you for joining us today. You are on a personal journey, no matter where you are in it. You are important and you matter. Your health and wellness are important and matter. And we're here to keep you well to excel. So go have a great week, Illini. Let us know how you're doing, and we'll catch you next time on Healthy Illini.